Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is May 17th. Today in garden history, we remember Sandro Botticelli, the Italian Renaissance master who died on this day, May 17th in 1510. His painting, Allegory of Abundance, or Autumn, is one of his most elaborate and detailed drawings, and it depicts an abundance of fruit and flowers. Sandro painted idyllic garden scenes filled with beautiful women and men from the classical period. His painting, Primavera, depicts 9 springtime gods and goddesses in a garden. Venus, the goddess of love, presides over the garden of the Hesperides, and to her right, Flora, the goddess of flowers, sprinkles roses. The garden features orange and laurel trees and dozens of other species of plants. And it was on this day, May 17th in 1642, that Paul Champmathieu de Maisonneuve, the French military officer, caught his first glimpse of the landscape that would become Montreal. And today, Paul is recognized as the founder of that city. And in George Waldo Brown's 1905 book, The St. Louis River, there is a wonderful little snippet about the moment that Paul first spied Montreal. George wrote, "On the 17th of May, the rounded slopes of Mount Royal, clad in the delicate green foliage of spring, burst into sight, stirring the hearts of the anxious beholders with newfound joy. They were delighted with the scenery. The fragrance of the springing forest permeated the balmy air." Maisonneuve was the first person to step upon the land, and as the others followed him, they fell upon their knees, sending up their songs of praise and thanksgiving. Their first work was to make an altar within sight and sound of the riverbank, the women decorating the rough woodwork with some of the wildflowers that were growing in abundance on the island. Then every member of the party knelt in solemn silence while Monsieur Vimont performed the High Mass, and as he closed, he addressed his little congregation with these prophetic words: "You are a grain of mustard seed that shall rise and grow till its branches overshadow the earth." And today we remember Robert Tannahill, the Scottish poet and lyricist. He died on this day, May 17th in 1810. Remembered as the Weaver poet, Robert was born in Paisley, and he's often hailed as Paisley's own Robert Burns, as his work is said to rival Robert Burns. Today in Paisley, there is a stunning 50-foot-high mural of a young Robert Tannahill. He's holding a basket of fruit, and it was painted by Mark Wurst in collaboration with the Paisley Housing Association. This stunning mural overlooks the spot where Robert Tannahill was born on Castle Street back in 1774. One of Robert's most beloved songs is "Will Ye Go, Lassie, Go?" The lyrics mention picking wild mountain thyme, a plant known botanically as Thymus serpyllum. Wild mountain thyme is a showy, wide-growing ground cover from the Old World, and it has beautiful rosy red flowers and glossy, deep green, mat-forming foliage. So if you've ever grown creeping thyme, you'll know that thyme creeps everywhere. And in the song, the thyme has grown in and around the heather. The lyrics begin like this: "Oh, the summertime has come, and the trees are sweetly blowing. The wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather. Will ye go, lassie, go?" Now, if you want to hear one of my favorite versions of Will Ye Go, Lassie Go, you can click on the link in today's show notes, or you can just search for the words Humbird, that's the name of the artist, and then Will Ye Go, Lassie Go. And her version of this song will pop up and you can listen to it. And trust me, all week I've been listening to variations of Will Ye Go, Lassie Go, and this one is definitely the prettiest. All right, and today we also celebrate the birthday of Elvin Charles Stakman, the American plant pathologist who was born on this day, May 17th, in 1885. Elvin is remembered for his work identifying and combating diseases in wheat. In 1917, he married a fellow plant pathologist named Estelle Louise Jensen, and he also encouraged Norman Borlaug to pursue his career in phytopathology after Norman's job at the Forest Service was eliminated due to budget cuts. And it turns out that Elvin was Norman's teacher. He was a lifelong mentor, and Norman went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 after he discovered a dwarf wheat variety that reduced famine in India, Pakistan, and other third world countries. In 1938, Elvin Charles Stakman gave a speech, and it was called this: "These shifty little enemies that destroy our food crops." What a title. Well, during his talk, Elvin focused on one shifty little enemy in particular, and that was rust. Rust is a parasitic fungus that feeds on phytonutrients in grain crops like wheat, oat, and barley. Today, Elvin is remembered with the naming of Stakman Hall. It's the building where plant pathology is taught at the University of Minnesota's St. Paul campus. And in a book called The Wizard and the Prophet by Charles Mann, the author reflected, Stakman did not view science as a disinterested quest for knowledge. It was a tool, maybe the tool for human betterment. Not all the sciences were equally valuable, as he liked to explain. Botany, he said, is the most important of all sciences, and plant pathology is one of its most essential branches. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, 150 Gardens You Need to Visit Before You Die by Stephanie Waldeck. This book came out in 2022, and here's what Stephanie writes in her introduction. In 150 Gardens You Need to Visit Before You Die, I've shared a vast range of gardens, from immense botanical institutions with thousands of specimens to smaller plots for quiet meditations, to museums that combine both artworks and plantings. I hope these brief introductions inspire you to plan a visit or two, whether in your hometown or on your global travels, so that you can enjoy the sights, smells, sounds, and stories of the world's best gardens. Well, the publisher of this book writes, from Kew Gardens in London to the Singapore Botanical Gardens, and from Monet's garden at Giverny to the Zen Gardens in Kyoto, this handsomely bound book captures in words and images the most notable features of these 150 glorious, not-to-be-missed gardens. It's an essential bucket list book for garden lovers. I think this book would be a great special occasion book, a great book for a birthday or for Christmas. And I was very surprised when I looked at the list that Stephanie compiled, because not only were there names that I thought should be there, but I have to admit that at least half of them I wasn't even familiar with. So now I have more gardens that I'm looking at investigating, just thanks to Stephanie's book and her very diligent work on putting this all together. So there you go. This book is 256 pages of gardens from around the world that are sure to make your jaw drop and potentially spark the desire to go for a visit. You can get a copy of 150 Gardens You Need to Visit Before You Die by Stephanie Waldick and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $25. Finally, we end the show today with a botanic spark that celebrates the garden writer Louisa Yeomans King. It was on this day, May 17th in 1905, that Louisa wrote in her garden journal about peonies. She had published a year's worth of entries in her book called The Flower Garden Day by Day, and it's one of my favorites, and I managed to get my hands on a used copy where someone had actually written some of their own journal entries, which makes the book that much more special to me. Now, before I read this passage from Louisa, I thought I'd give you just a quick 101 overview of her life. In 1902, Louisa and her husband moved to Michigan, and that's where they built a home that they called Orchard House. And with the help of a man named Frank Acne, who was a gardener, Louisa began to plan and create her garden. She also began writing about her gardens, and soon she was giving lectures, contributing pieces to magazines, writing columns for newspapers, and organizing garden clubs. And she even became friends with the prominent gardeners of her time, like Gertrude Jekyll, Charles Sprague Sargent, and the landscape architects Fletcher Steele and Ellen Biddle Shipman. What a group of friends. And Louisa learned to garden during the heyday of American garden culture. So her desire to pursue garden writing was totally on point, and it made her one of the most widely read American garden authors in the United States. For Louisa's first book, The Well-Considered Garden, the preface was written by her dear friend Gertrude Jekyll. In 1915, when the book debuted, it was considered an instant garden classic. And I'm looking at my copy right now. I keep it on a special bookshelf where I keep all of my garden classics. Now, the garden estate, known as Blythewold, has a very special copy of The Well-Considered Garden. In fact, their particular book contains a handwritten inscription along with Louisa's signature, which is fantastic. But to me, it's really the inscription that is what makes this particular copy so fantastic, because Louisa did something that I like to call a quote hack, and that's where you take a quote and you modify it just a little bit to make it your own. So one of mine is a quote from Cicero that says, "If you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need." That's a wonderful quote. Well, I have always quote hacked that to say, if you have a garden podcast, and a library, you have everything you need. Well, along those same lines, Louisa changed a quote by Sir William Temple, who once said, "Gardening is an enjoyment and a possession for which no man is too high or too low." And she changed the quote when she was writing in that copy of The Well-Considered Garden, and she wrote, "Gardening is an enjoyment and a possession for which no woman is too high or too low." So go Louisa. Louisa helped start the Garden Club of America and the Women's National Farm and Garden Association, and she held leadership positions in both organizations. Not surprising. But when her husband died suddenly in 1927, Louisa was forced to sell Orchard House. She moved to Hartford, New York, and she bought a property there that she called Kingstree. And this time, since she had the chance to do everything over, she decided to set up a smaller garden. And of course, the smaller size meant less work, which better accommodated Louisa's writing and her speaking commitments. And so there's a little quick biography for you on Louisa Yeomans King. And now here's what she wrote in her journal on this day. It was a little note of advice about the peony. She wrote, "Disbud most of your peonies now, that is, of a cluster of buds. Cut off all but the larger central bud. Certain varieties, however, are considered more beautiful if left alone to flower as they will. Among these are Alsace-Lorraine, and La Rosary. Well, I don't know about you, but up here in Minnesota, I have not done that. I have not removed the buds of my peonies, kind of like you would do with a pumpkin, hoping that you can get one large pumpkin off the vine if you take off all the other flowers. And I think that was Luisa's goal here. Now, what I do like to do is to bring peonies into the house as a cut flower and enjoy them that way. In fact, I was just telling my sister-in-law that for my niece's engagement party, that it would be lovely to have lilacs in the house and then also peony, because those are the items that would be seasonally in bloom. Well, my brother nixed the idea of lilacs because apparently he's allergic to them, and I had no idea. So no lilacs in the house over there. But my sister-in-law loved the idea of the peonies. And peonies look so amazing in those little bud vases, those little circular globes that you just put the flower in. And then when the party's over, you can either send your guests home with a peony in a vase, or you can take them and you can spread them around your house. They are low maintenance. You don't need to water them as much because there's already water at the bottom. And they're so beautiful. They're long lasting and so fragrant. Such a wonderful springtime addition to your house. Oh, and one other thing that my sister-in-law liked about the idea of using peonies for the floral arrangements is that they have cats, and the cats won't be able to knock the peonies around like they can when there's a larger arrangement sitting on the table. That's something my sister-in-law always has to worry about, is the cats tipping that over, and that probably won't happen with the peonies in these bud vases. So win-win. Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.